Hi there. For this week's Unpacking the News, we want to talk about why the economy is such a central focus of politics, and in particular, the way that voters think about the economy as it relates to those very same politics. Now, our main goal will be to provide you with a bit more context for understanding the centrality of economic performance to political outcomes, but also to this persistent flow of news and issues that are related to the economy, including lots of different stories in the news just in recent weeks and months. Now, two issues that are largely considered direct indicators of how the economy is doing include employment and unemployment statistics, in other words, jobs, and measures of prices and inflation. From the perspective of consumers, this boils down to how expensive things are and how quickly prices are or aren't increasing. Now, there are more technical definitions of inflation that we're going to set aside for now, unless you want to talk about like price inflation and rising prices.
I do like this topic, but I think it's a little much.
Maybe not?
Maybe next time. Next time. Okay. So there are other issues that are very much in the news that also have to do with policy decisions that have major economic consequences, like the extent to which the U.S. is or isn't applying tariffs on foreign goods, which is just a tax that is paid to import products or parts of products made in other countries, and that ultimately result in higher prices for people. Another issue is the Federal Reserve Bank's setting of its key interest rates. I know that sounds really interesting, right? These are the rates that regular banks, including the banks that we all use, borrow money from the federal government at. These rates, in turn, impact interest rates throughout the entire economy. So the interest rate that you pay on your credit card or a car loan, to the interest rate that some of you pay on, your student loans, and eventually on your home mortgage, these are all affected by these key interest rates. Additionally, how much money the government borrows to finance its spending through the sale of government bonds also impacts interest rates throughout the entire economy. And while we just mentioned things that might impact you personally, more broadly, these rates impact businesses' decisions whenever they might be thinking about borrowing money. Now, most big projects that businesses undertake, so when they want to expand their operations, build new facilities, which ultimately result in more jobs, all of those are financed by loans whose ultimate final cost is going to be determined by these rates, which government policy directly impacts. Now, just as important is the amount of money that is being spent by the government and how it's being spent. Now, taken together, this is just known as the federal budget, right? But this budget has major ramifications on the entire economy due to both the sheer size of the federal government and the sheer amount of its spending. And this spending influences supply and demand all over the economy for both businesses and individuals. And I should also say it directly impacts people who benefit or rely on some of these government programs.
Now, the point of introducing these concepts isn't to make you an expert in any of them or even to focus so much on any single of these concepts or these entities that we've referred to. And certainly we're not going to do that with all of them in any depth. But the point rather is to provide a little more background for what you might be hearing out there, which we're often trying to do in here, to talk about what and how the public pays attention to the economy amidst all of this noise and all this action. And finally, to discuss why it all seems to matter so much for electoral politics. And so again, this isn't an economics class and we're not economists. We don't make that much money. It's a class about government and politics. So while we might provide a few working provisional definitions for some of the key terms as we go, the focus will mainly be on how economics intersects with politics and government, with the hope that at the end you'll understand why these issues come up so often and are so central to politics. So let's start with a few basic observations that are based on polling data and on the last few decades of presidential elections. What do you say?
All right, yeah. So first, we want to tell you that voters generally tell pollsters that the economy is important to their vote choice, right? Now, this is a very simple graphic that you're looking at right here, but what it illustrates is that large shares of voters, near or just above a majority, pretty consistently say that the economy is, quote, extremely important in their presidential vote decision. And we can see that this trend goes back to as far as at least the 1996 election, which is just as far back as this time series goes. I suspect it would continue even further back. Yeah. Now, the two high points that are evident in the graphic are in 2008 and 2024. In 2008, the immediate economic context was the banking and mortgage crisis that year. Democrat Barack Obama defeated Republican John McCain, who was running to succeed George W. Bush, who had served 2 terms and couldn't run again. Now, Republicans, particularly President Bush, were largely blamed for the collapse of the housing market and the economic crash that followed, and somewhat more specifically, for the bailout package that was widely viewed as saving big banks on the one hand, but not doing enough or much to help average people, many of whom were really losing their homes when the very same banks foreclosed on their mortgages. So this was not a good look for anybody in power, to say the least. So the popular refrain at the time was that the government had bailed out Wall Street, but not Main Street, or something like that. It was pretty catchy. I thought it was a good one. So more recently, in 2024, voters returned Donald Trump to the White House instead of electing incumbent President Joe Biden's Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, the key economic concern that contributed to voters punishing a Democratic president and his party in that election was the issue of rising prices and inflation, which is a problem that is still very much on voters' minds 1 year later. Now, while we could continue looking at national data, let's use some of our own Texas polling data to show you some views from closer to home, or at least here, or if it's not your home, or not your home yet, right, whoever that is. Now, the patterns we're going to look at here are not going to differ in substantial ways from national views, so you don't have to worry about that.
Okay, let's start with the observation that the economy is important to voters, just like the national data on presidential vote choice showed a minute ago. Recent Texas data finds that a plurality of voters, and remember, a plurality is the largest group in the results, though not a majority, saying that either the economy or inflation and prices are the #1 issue facing the country. And this is from the August 2025 UT Texas Politics Project poll. So at 27%, and you can see we've added them up on the slide, just a little over 1 in 4 voters say that this is the most important issue facing the country. Now, remember, that's the country. In addition, if you look at this next graphic, about 1 in 5 voters, 20%, say the same about Texas. And this isn't a new concern. When we asked at the beginning of 2025, the same year, in an open-ended question, which means that the survey respondent could provide any answer they want. We ask them a question and they write in a few words. We asked them what issue they think the Texas legislature should prioritize during its regular legislative session. So remember, it's January, the legislature is going in for its biennial session. When we asked that, the economy and inflation and prices topped the list, along with the persistent issues that we've seen over a long period of time. Those would be immigration and border security and public education. And you see that in the first, basically 3 bars on the left of the graph that are highest. So why is the economy front of mind for so many voters and on the minds of so many voters so consistently? Well, there are 2 big parts of the answer to that question. The first is about current conditions, while the second is more about voters in general, the importance of the economy, and the government's impact on it. So let's start with immediate conditions. In general, people's perception of the economy are negative and have been for the last couple of years. This poll question asked whether the national economy was doing better, worse, or about the same as a year ago. Now, this is also from August of 2025, so the benchmark is August of 2024 that we're asking people to make the comparison to, more or less. Now, here we see that only 33%, about a third of Texans, said that the national economy is doing better than a year ago, while 40% say that it's performing worse, a plurality, with 15% saying it's doing about the same. Now, we also asked about the state economy, and here are those results. 27% say that the state economy is doing better compared to a year ago, while 44% say worse. And then getting a little more specific and asking about people's own economic situation, only 23% say that they're doing personally better compared to the previous year, with 40% saying that they're worse off, and 35% saying that they're about the same, kind of a holding pattern, if you will. Now, if, in addition to the 40% who say that they're doing worse, more than 1 in 3 voters say that they're doing about the same, it's kind of worthwhile to examine how people felt about the economy last year. Now, not great, it turns out. Now, this kind of goes further back in time. Obviously, this is a trend graphic. As you can see in this graphic, which just shows the response to the question about the national economy and the results for almost 2 decades, going back to 2008, the share of Texans viewing the national economy as getting worse, the green line, has outpaced the share who say that the economy is getting better, the blue line, in every survey since February of 2020. And if we look at a similar graphic of people's evaluation of their own personal economic situation, while we do see that the most common response over the time series has been no change, the orange line, as in, people view their economic situation as unchanged compared to the prior year, since at least 2022, the share saying that they're doing worse, the green line again, has either significantly outpaced or competed with the share who's saying that they're doing the same.
That's right. So these overall numbers invite a follow-up question to help us interpret this data a little bit further. So that question is, what are Texans most worried about economically? Now, what do you guys think? There's nobody in the room. It's just you and me. So it's it's a rhetorical.
You over there.
You over there. Nobody can see us. But anyway, we're here by ourselves. So what is it, right? Is it the new federal budget? Is it interest rates? Is it how the stock market is doing? Is it the threat of artificial intelligence? What is it that people are worried about? Well, just prices really, or at least primarily. Here, we can see that a majority of Texans say that they are very concerned, not merely somewhat concerned, but very concerned about the price of consumer goods, the cost of health care, and the cost of housing. And we can also see that these concerns have been persistent among voters since at least before the last election and largely unabated. And maybe this points to some general observations we can start to make about the economy here. So first, we know from research that the economy matters to voters because we generally see both in the US and in other countries that incumbent parties, that is, the candidates and parties already in office, usually have difficult elections when the economy is underperforming or performing poorly. So this is a fundamental observation that's accepted by both political professionals and academics. Voters as a group make decisions that ultimately punish parties that oversee bad economies. So in general, we basically believe that this is due to the fact that the economy is the most salient issue to the largest share of voters. Salient is just a fancy way of saying noticeable, important, prominent. It's a good college word. I like it. Usually and historically, voters notice the availability of good-paying jobs and low unemployment as signs of a good economy, and they reward or at least don't punish elected officials or parties during generally good times. But recently, the persistent issue of high prices has become an extremely salient issue to a large share of voters. And as we saw in our example of the 2024 elections, voters tend to notice high prices and do tend to exact punishment at the ballot box for what they directly experience as signs of a bad economic performance, right?
Yeah, obviously there are other political issues out there like immigration, abortion, gun violence, free speech, and on and on. But nonetheless, economic issues are always very immediate, good times or bad. Most voters depend on a job that pays them enough to live or not, or pays them enough to move ahead in their life or not. So they pay attention to employment and jobs. All of them buy groceries. Almost all of them fill their car with gas, and they notice what it costs. And once a month, most will pay rent or a mortgage payment that may or may not take too much out of their paycheck and may be going up. Many Americans will face an unexpected automotive or health expense, and research tells us that about half wouldn't be able to cover it out of pocket if the expense were more than $1,000. So we shouldn't be surprised that people are telling us that prices they pay are important and that higher prices get their attention, or in turn, at a higher level, that the economy gets a ton of attention from politicians and from the press. Even if some of these issues, benchmark interest rates, the national debt, maybe even the concept of inflation are likely to be inherently abstract or complicated to almost all or most of you, we hope that you can see why these views and the effects of politicians to respond to or even to try to shape them are so important when we think about politics.
Yeah, that's right. Just to wrap that up a little bit, it is the case that you're going to hear throughout the entire time you're following politics, a persistent focus on the economy, a persistent focus on how people are doing. And I think as professionals, we often get asked these questions about, well, this issue has come up. Isn't it going to crack open the election? And I say, well, not if the economy's the bigger issue. And usually the economy is the bigger issue unless it's not. But it's very rare for politicians to effectively force the economy from the agenda if it's on the agenda, if it's on voters' minds.
Right. That's totally right.
Okay, so that's unpacking the news at the intersection of politics and the economy. Please, review this and then take the quiz, and please prep for the next module quiz. We'll be back with the next module as soon as you all are ready. So we'll see you soon.